G'day jabronis, it is the Verd, back with you again. It has been quite a while since I have recorded a YouTube video. I think the last one I did was like a Yu-Gi-Oh opening, which was like really odd. Weird little phase, I suppose, of my life there. But I'm here back again with some Pokemon content, basically because, you know, I hadn't really thought about coming back to the YouTube platform. I mean, I never really did this thing for views or likes or anything like that. I just did it because I found that when I play the game, I tend to talk a lot, and I thought that maybe people would enjoy hearing my voice or hearing what I had to say about the Pokemon TCG. But yeah, like I played, and you know, I've only been playing Pokemon for like less than 2 years. I think I started in August 2019 playing the Pokemon TCG card game when Unified Minds got released. That's when I started, and I'm coming to you now with my deck list that still kind of hard to believe, I won't lie, got me to the top 4 of Oceania in the Players Cup Qualifiers. So of all the people in Oceania that participated, down to like top 128, and then from my top 128 games, I just never lost, and I went straight through undefeated all the way to securing qualification. So what I'm going to do today is not necessarily play any games with this deck, and I'll kind of explain why as I'm going on, but more or less what I want to do, and it's something that I've done I think in the past as well, is I really want to give a deep dive into the deck, and just kind of break down the choices, the deck building process, all that stuff. This is the kind of content that I want to put out, less about, you know, gameplay, because I mean, anybody could do gameplay. Like, there's lots of bigger YouTube channels where they see an amazing deck come out and they're like, let's play some games and show you why it's busted, whereas I'd rather sit down and say, I'm not going to play any games with the deck, but I'm going to explain to you why the deck is so strong and why certain building structures are really solid. So hopefully you appreciate that. If you are new to the channel, which some of you might be, because I definitely garnered a lot of attention for making top 4. Hello, my name's Sam. I go by the Verd online. Basically, I used to play Draft League, and I went from Draft League to VGC, and then when the Melbourne Esports Open came around, I decided to play VGC and TCG, found that I wasn't actually that bad at TCG, and because South Australia has no VGC scene, I decided to pick up TCG instead. I am now a member of the Sableyes, who you guys, I'm sure, would have heard of. If you haven't, then I will link them down in the description. I, you know, help out sometimes with their videos, but mainly it is Mitch running that. Great guy. I sound like Trump though. He's a great guy, love you guy, you know. But Mitch is a really awesome guy, so I would definitely recommend you guys check them out. They post a lot more Pokemon than I do, and they post really good gameplay, which sometimes I'm a part of, every now and then. But today is just about, I guess, me breaking down this deck. So yeah, Eternatus was an interesting call heading into the Players Cup. It was definitely not the deck I expected to play for the build-up to the Players Cup and for qualifying. So when we had, obviously, the Tournament Keys, the main 2 decks that I used were Christian Hasbani's ADP Zacian deck that ran the 4 Pokemon Catcher, as well as Jake Gearhart's Luke Metal list. I liked both of them. I preferred Jake Gearhart's Luke Metal list because I didn't like Crushing Hammer. I thought that Crushing Hammer was just a really stupid card in the meta, but I liked how Luke Metal had some super favorable matchups. The downside was that at the weekend, when I decided to try and grind all my games, was when Tord Reklev posted his Center Scorch Magneton list, and of course everyone swarmed onto that list, and I faced a lot of them on the ladder and was getting crushed, to say the least. I was getting absolutely decimated because I wasn't running the weak guards at that time. I was just running maximum like consistency of metal energies, which was a mistake on my part. I got only 69 points in my qualifiers, but fortunately, being in Oceania, that was enough to get me to the top 128, so it wasn't like a very convincing qualifying phase. I thought both decks were fine. I probably should have played more of the ADP Zacian deck because it was just a win more list, and you know, it goes to show that that exact list was what Christian Hasbani used to go undefeated in the Players Cup Qualifiers too. He and I were the 2 undefeated decks by the end of it, which was pretty cool. Christian and I are good friends, so it was great to see him also succeed. And like I remember vividly, it was just before we were going into Players Cup, and we had a winner box at South Australia, like locals, and my friend Jordan Palmer decided to run a list very similar to this. It was a list that Tablemon used, I think in a tournament a while back, where it was running like the 4 Spiritomb, I think it was 2 Zigzagoon, and then instead of the Sable IV, there was like, I think 4 Power Plant, might have been 4 Comms. It was like uber consistency, right? Or like, not uber consistency, but like 4 ofs of like everything, pretty much, and anti-meta oppression, and Jordan and also James Goring, who I believe finished in the top 8 for the Players Cup qualifier, he also had been running this deck, and both the times they used it, it went undefeated at winner boxes, and I was like, okay, this deck seems pretty good, and I liked a few aspects of it. One, Power Plant just seemed like a amazing stadium heading into Players Cup, because the biggest decks at the time going into it, a lot of them were heavily reliant on Dedenne if they couldn't find a supporter. So things like Pikarom, ADP, even like Center Scorch to an extent. If you have Power Plant in play and they couldn't obviously find the Hearth to get rid of it, was just really solid. So off the bat, I was like, hey, this list is sick. So I took Pablo's initial list, and I sat down with Jordan and I said, right, what can we do to adjust it to make it work the best for the current meta? So one of the first changes that we made was changing the Spiritomb Zigzagoon line. I think 3-3 worked out perfectly. The reason why I think 3 Zigzagoon was definitely the call, with the Headbutt Tantrum ability. I'm going to also break down all the cards. I think that's a really important thing to do. So Galarian Zigzagoon has an ability where if you play it from your hand onto your bench, you can put 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. This was really crucial for particular matchups. The first matchup I would like to say it's good for is ADP. ADP without a big charm, by using 1 Zigzagoon to put a damage counter on it, it means that your Eternatus VMAX will knock it out with Dread End with a full bench. And I run 3 Zigzagoon because you would need 4 to guarantee a knockout with Dread End. But the reason I like 3 was also for the Pikarom matchup, because if they put a big charm on Raichu or Alolan Raichu, then they hit 290 HP, and so you just need to hit 2 of these Zigzagoons. But the reason you run 3, I think, is so that your chances of hitting the 2 goons that you need in that situation are higher, to guarantee that knockout. Because usually your math against Pikarom is Dread End Pikarom, Dread End Choo-Choo, and that's just the game. Essentially, ideally, Dread Ending Choo-Choo first is best, but it's really hard to get to that point of the game. So 3-3 line of those. Obviously, max consistency here. Crobat V with the Dark Asset ability. You play this from your hand. You can only use it once in a turn, but play it from your hand and then draw until you have 6 cards. Crobat was amazing. Obviously, the thing that made this Eternatus list really strong too, and like any Eternatus list, because it runs the 4 Crobat, is that if you get Marnied or Stamped, then you have so many outs. Like, there were a lot of times where people thought that I kind of sacked them in matches because they would reset Stamp or Marnie me and I'd find a way out of it. But it's like, if I haven't used all my Crobats and you stamp me into a Quick Ball or a Com or a Great Ball, then there is always a chance that I'm going to hit this Crobat and be able to recover from that. So it's like, I don't know what you want from me. Just Crobat as a card was really good to deal with that kind of disruption. Obviously, the main attacker in the list was the Eternatus V into VMAX. So Power Accelerator, a very strong card, very strong attack going second. You could use it with a colorless energy, which means you could run any energy with it, which I'll get to with like a future list a bit later on. But it attaches a dark energy from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon. So the whole premise was that usually with this deck you want to go first, but say if you're playing against like Center Scorch, you want to go second. And if you do, you can Power Accelerator from one Eternatus that has 1 energy onto another Eternatus that has energy. So even if a Center Scorch comes up and kills one of your Eternases, you have the second one that can come straight up and potentially reply. And then the big guy is Eternatus VMAX. His ability, Eternal Zone, states that if you have all Dark Pokemon on your bench, then you can bench up to 8 Pokemon, and Dread End does 30 damage for each Dark Pokemon in play. So with that math, it's that you can have 8 Pokemon on your bench, plus the VMAX inactive, so that is 9 Pokemon, so Dread End does 270 damage, which is just insane. For 2 energy, 270 is wild. In terms of like just quick search cards, I'll just throw them in here. Great Ball, just look at the top 7 cards of your deck. If you find a Pokemon there, you can add it to your hand. It's up to you. You don't have to add a Pokemon to your hand, which is really important because sometimes you will choose not to add a Pokemon with Great Ball because maybe you're holding a Crobat, but the Pokemon that you find would have been basic, and if you don't have Eternatus VMAX down and you don't want to then clog your bench and prevent yourself from using Crobat, so sometimes it's just to thin it to see more cards off of Crobat. Same goes for Pecom. Like, sometimes you would use this to put back a Crobat just to add the Crobat back to your hand, just to assure that you got more cards off of the Dark asset. Quick Ball, obviously busted card. Discard a Pokemon, discard a card, add a basic Pokemon to your hand. Obviously, the main way we're searching for Crobat is through Quick Ball, and by discarding it means there's one less card in hand, so Crobat sees more value. 4 copies of Switch, because obviously we need to be switching in this deck. Really clutch having the 4 copies against things like the Pikarom and the Mewtwo matchups, where they both rely heavily on Paralysis being able to beat Eternatus. So definitely run 4 of these, and also make sure that you don't waste them. There are definitely times when you want to Professor's Research, but you don't want it to be at the consequence of losing a Switch, especially against things like Pikarom, where they can hard punish you for that. 3 copies of Turbo Patch. The reason this was included, I believe I know why Pablo chose to include it in his original list, was due to the fact that during this time, Crushing Hammer was a very prevalent card in our meta, and it was a very tough thing for Eternatus to play against. Eternatus has no acceleration, and the acceleration cards it could have are clunky, so they're not worth it. So what Turbo Patch was able to do was you can bounce back from, say, like a Full Metal Wall or a Crushing Hammer, you Turbo Patch onto a V, attach again, evolve it into a VMAX, and then boom, you're off the races. I had it happen once before, I think, where I had 2 Eternatuses because I power accelerated. My Pikarom opponent hit 2 heads on Crushing Hammers, and then on the next turn I attached flip heads on Turbo Patch, evolved into the VMAX, knocked out his Pikarom, and that basically just swung the game completely in my favour. So Turbo Patch is incredible. Power Plant, like I explained a bit earlier, was the best stadium that I could have picked for this tournament. I think it was better than Swell, it was better than Dark City. Being able to shut off primarily Dedenne GX was a huge factor, because Dedenne was a big out for opponents, and it was also a huge extender. It made the ADP matchup a lot more favourable, because you forced them to... the game plan against ADP, which I'll kind of explain, was that you would use Marnie to keep them on like a low hand, and then have Power Plant in play. By doing that, it's very unlikely after you knock out their ADP that they're going to be able to find Zacian with like the energy required, as well as Boss's Orders. They'd have to be using a Crobat, and usually most ADP lists only run 1 Crobat. So Marnie plus Power Plant, if it lets you stick for 1 turn, you win that matchup easily. Boss's Orders is basically just a Gust. Obviously super strong. I could have ran 4, but I liked 3. Funnily enough, the deck doesn't need a super big amount of Gust, because most of the matchups you have, the big targets that you want, are already in the active, and you can just knock them out. But this is more or less for if your opponent's trying to hide something on the bench that you can just Gust kill for game. I will say Power Plant also was incredibly clutch in 2 of my matches on my run where I played against Mewtwo decks. Power Plant shutting off their abilities was just massive. Professor's Research, pretty straightforward. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. This was the main extender that I would use on the turn that I wanted to Dread End, just to secure as many Pokemon in play as possible. And then 10 Darkness Energy, which was kind of a high count, but Jordan and I talked about it, and we felt like 9 was not enough energy. We wanted to ensure that every time we started, we would be guaranteed an energy to attach to our Eternatus, so 10 felt like the best option there. So the big tech card, I guess, that I came around to us including, because we talked about running the Hooper with Assault Gate, but what I decided on was the Sableye V. This was kind of my big inclusion to the deck that ended up being a pretty important card. It definitely didn't come up in my sets, but I know that if I'd played against things like Luke Metal, it definitely would have. This did come in handy in some matchups. So the reason why this card is so good is because Eternatus' worst matchup on paper is Lucario and Melmetal, purely because they run Zamazenta. Now, Zamazenta V's ability prevents it from being hit by VMAXs, so it means that Eternatus could never attack into a Zamazenta. So the whole premise was that you'd use Spiritombs, build up some Spite, and hit into a Zamazenta while using Marnie to prevent your opponent from being able to have a Malolana in hand. And then because they were chipped with damage, you can go in with the Sableye with the Crazy Claws attack. So for 2 Dark Energy, it does 10 plus 60 for each damage counter on the active Pokemon. So the whole premise was that you set up a tomb, you swing with Anguish Cry, and you leave them with about 4 damage counters. With 4 damage counters, Sableye V's Crazy Claws would be doing 250 damage. Now, a Zamazenta with 40 damage on it, after a full Metal Wall and Metal Goggles attached, has technically 290 HP, because the full Metal Wall decreases damage by 30, Goggles also decreases damage by 30, so they're taking 60 less. So you hit the perfect math for a Zamazenta V knockout by having 4 counters on it, and then attacking with Sableye. Now you have to be careful because the Metal Goggles do prevent Zigzagoons from damaging them with Headbutt Tantrum. So what is really crucial in the early game, if you see your opponent have Luke Metal, Zacian, and a Zamazenta, what you need to do is use one of these Zigzagoons to chip the Zacian, because the Zacian, after full Metal Wall and Metal Goggles being attached to it, has 280 HP, which will not be knocked out by a Dread End. But if you're able to ping it once with the Zigzagoon, then it's in perfect knockout range for Eternatus, and it makes your math for winning the game a whole lot easier. So that's why Sableye was initially included, was because the Luke Metal matchup seemed super rough, and Sableye does balance it out a bit more. That's also why there's no special energy in here, because it's very easy for Sableye to just discard them. Also, all basic energies is important because of Turbo Patch, because it does state it needs to be a basic energy. So, I think I've gone over all the cards. So the building process, like I said, we were definitely iffy on, like, I think the initial list had 2 Com, 4 Great Ball, again like the Zigzagoon and Tomb. I just split them because I felt like both of the cards were really important. I think there used to be 4 of both the Turbo Patch and the Power Plant, but I decided that I wanted the 4th Eternatus VMAX and the 10th Energy, so that's where those cuts came from. Everything else was basically kept the same, similar to Pablo's list, but this is the beast that I ended up on, and it felt really good. Like, through testing, I went onto like the Versus ladder online, and I breezed my way to 2,000 points. The deck got on like very consistent win streaks. It felt very solid against almost every deck. Luke Metal was definitely the hardest matchup, but because of the Sableye being included, it definitely felt winnable. You just had to try and play smart, and you had to understand that Luke Metal players are looking for a grindy game, and so are you. Your whole premise is that you want to ensure that you can hit them with Spiritomb as you Marnie, and then be able to attack the next turn with Sableye. And that was kind of the math to setting up a victory for that one. So yeah, I'm going to kind of then like break down, I suppose, how the matchups went that I played against, because there were some interesting ones for sure, and I guess try and break down like the reasons why certain cards came in clutch in certain areas. So first round, I actually played like one of the harder matchups for this deck, which is Inteleon Frostmoth. The reason why it's difficult is because I play things like Zigzagoon with 70 HP and Spiritomb with 60, and I can't run a Mew because of Eternal Zone. So they were able to always attack and then probably just knock out a Pokemon on the bench if they ever attacked with Inteleon. So that made things very difficult, and I had to make sure that I was being very smart with how I played the matchup. And the way that I found it being most successful was, again, the Marnie plus Power Plant combo, because my opponent was running more Dedenne than Crobat, so I knew I could capitalize on that count, and I knew that if Power Plant stuck, it'd be great. They also ran a Keldeo GX, which definitely was very intimidating for the Eternatus VMAX, because, okay, Steam, no, let's not do that. Get out of there, Steam. I don't know what's going on. Alright, we got the VMAX there. Because Eternatus VMAX can bench up to 8, Keldeo GX does 50 for each bench Pokemon. So if I had a full bench, Keldeo's doing 400 with his GX tag, which is terrifying. So the way that I tackled the Inteleon matchup usually was, because of Inteleon's HP stat, I would set up a Spiritomb and then hit Inteleon for usually like the 40 damage. So I'd set up one Building Spite, and then Anguish Cry for 40. Because that meant then all I had to do was ping them once with Zigzagoon, and then I could knock them out with Eternatus. They had Zigzagoon plus Scoop Up Net, so I had to be careful of them being able to just gust a Crobat, pinging it twice with Zigzagoon, and then the Max Bullet knocks that out, as well as a Spiritomb. I also had to be careful early game, because if they had an Inteleon V, if I chose to Building Spire a Spiritomb, then all they need is one Zigzagoon ping, and they could just go for a snipe shot and get an easy knockout on a Spiritomb. So it was all just about being smart. But what I did was just never build. I never built Spite early in the game. Like I said, the plan was to maybe attach to Eternatus turn 1. Turn 2 was to actually attach to a Spiritomb and swing to chip it, and then go in with the Eternatus, because then if Keldeo got the reverse knockout, then there were backup plans, like a Spiritomb with 5 counters on it, using Building Spite, plus 1 Zigzagoon ping, will be able to knock out a Keldeo, which is pretty massive. So I ended up winning that set 2-1. The first game went really smooth. My opponent could never set up. The other thing that you can do in that matchup, which is super favorable, is if they only bench 1 Frostmoth, you just chase it down. So by Building Spiting once to get to 40 and then pinging 1 Snom with a Goon, you just knock that thing straight out with Anguish Cry. And if that happens, then they have to waste a turn going for like Hydro Snipe to kill a Spiritomb, and then with a Turbo Patch, you can respond with Eternatus quite quickly and put an insane amount of pressure on your opponent. So that was also a very solid strategy in that game. I think game 2, I only lost it because he just set up flawlessly and I was just 1 turn behind. I think I had attachments every turn, but I wasn't able to get a Marnie Power Plant to stick, which happens, you know, it is what it is. And then the final game, Marnie Power Plant stuck. He had a Dead A in hand, but no supporter. Couldn't do anything, and because that bought me a turn, I was able to close that one out. So I didn't actually expect to win that matchup, but the deck, with the power of things like Marnie plus Power Plant, got me through. I should mention that I actually received a bye in the first round, so it was my second round game, was against Inteleon Frostmoth. So we go into the third round game, which is against Welder Mewtwo. They were only running 3 Giant Hearths, so I felt pretty favoured because I knew that the moment they had to play a Giant Hearth to use Welder, I could then just put down a Power Plant, and I knew that for the duration of the game, I would be able to always out their Hearth, and that felt really strong. Also, Money plus Power Plant in that matchup is huge because I don't believe my opponent was running Marshadow, so they never had a way to just easily remove Power Plant. It was a very cruisy 2-0. Eternatus being able to hit for 270 and Mewtwo not running Big Charm, I was just able to one-shot them. They never had the capacity to one-shot me, so felt pretty smooth. Not really much to say about that. Welder Mewtwo is definitely one of the more favourable matchups. The only bad thing they can really do to you is the Narcigu GX from Muck and Alola Muck, which is why we run the 4 copies of Switch. But also with Power Plant, we just shut off their abilities, and so Mewtwo just can't attack using its Perfection ability. So that's pretty clutch. So then I had one more game, I think, before the next day. So if I won that game, I would move on to top 16 overall. And I actually played against Brent Tonneson, who is a very good player. Ended up finishing top 4 as well, going through the losers bracket. So spoilers, we beat him, in case you didn't already realize. Pretty close set. Definitely felt like the matchup was favorable though, because like I said, they had Big Charms on their Choo-Choos, but 2 Goon Pings, and that doesn't matter. A Big Charm on a Pikarom only hits 270, so that's just knocked out easily by Dread End. Their only out is trying to reset stamp you to a low hand and praying, but like I said, if you just preserve your Crobats, that really doesn't matter because you have so many ways to hit them. And as long as you preserve your switches, the matchup feels pretty solid. You just need to not waste a ton of resources. I actually won the third game making a mistake. Well, I didn't make a mistake. It was maybe inexperience on my part. So I lost game 2 and I told Brent that I wanted to go first in the game chat before conceding, because I realized that I was going to lose. And then in the battle fight chat, Brent asked what I wanted to do, and I was like, well, surely you would have seen before I conceded that I wanted to go first. And I tried to message him, and then he timed out. And so then he ended up going first. Now, what I should have definitely done was just requested that the game was forfeited there and we restarted the game so that I was going first. But I'm just like, I've never been good at doing those kind of things. So I just sat there like, alright, shit, I guess we're doing this now. So I decided to go in, going second, saying, you know what? I think I can still beat him. And I did. So, you know, it is what it is. The deck kind of pulled through. I was just able to Power Accelerator and then just go knockout, knockout. And the game was done. So, yeah, it is what it is. I definitely should have maybe made more of a protest about it, but it didn't end up mattering at the end of the day. So we win that game and we go on to top 8 of winners. And then we moved on, I think in top 8 of winners, we played Frostmoth Mewtwo, Water Mewtwo, right? So this matchup was super favorable because their only attackers were 3 Mewtwo's and 1 Keldeo. And they only ran 2 Viridian Forests as their stadiums. So I was able to capitalize on this by, again, knowing that I could always out the Viridian with a power plant in my deck as long as I didn't waste them. So game 1 went incredibly smoothly. I just put down a power plant, and I think I killed a Mewtwo. The Keldeo came up. I killed the Keldeo after it killed me, and then power plant was in play. Mewtwo couldn't attack. Game 2, right? And then in game 2, we both just couldn't seem to draw anything good. He, fortunately for me, just kept whiffing boss, and then I top decked a VMAX, which I was able to use, gust his Keldeo, knock it out. He had used both of his Viridian Forest, so I put a power plant in play, and that was just checkmate, because he has no other attacker in his deck. He has no way to bump the power plant, and so the game was mine. So I was like, hell yeah, I am into top 4 of winners. So I had to win it in. Even if I lost it, I had one more match after that, which would have been against Brent, who I had already beaten. So I was like, okay, well, I just got to go in and see how it goes. And I was playing Matthew Burris, who I'm sure if you guys know Australian TCG players, you know Matthew Burris is a damn good player. He was running the exact same list as Brent. It was a very close set. I did get a bit fortunate. I think it was in the first game when he stamped me to 1, and the 1 card he stamped me to was a quick ball, which allowed me to just go Crobat, and I just zoomed to game. But like I said, the way that my deck is orientated, like if I'm stamped, then usually the only cards that are left in my deck are cards that can actually like still win me the game at that stage. Like if you manage your resources properly, then you shouldn't have an issue against Reset Stamp, and usually against Pikarom, you should be knocking out the Pikarom and then the Choo Choo. So even if they stamp you, you should only get stamped to 3, which gives you like an insane amount of outs to still be able to push the game back from there. So yeah, ended up winning that one because in game 3, he paralyzed my VMAX that was in the active, but I hadn't used any of my switches. I ended up top decking the switch, but I had a research in hand, so I could have easily just researched, probably hit one of my switches, and that was enough to give me the game. So that got me to top 2 winners. So me and Christian both went undefeated. In the end, Burris played Brent in a mirror match, and Brent went on to win that. And then James Cox was the other winner of the losers final, beating James, who was running the exact same list as me. James Cox, was running ADP, and then James Goring, who is also part of the Sableyes, he was running, I believe, this exact same list. Not 100% sure, but he ended up losing. So yeah, the 4 decks that went through was 2 ADP, 1 Pikarom, and 1 Eternatus, which is pretty cool. A decent bit of diversity, but I was very happy with how this deck turned out. So I guess what I'm gonna do to kind of finish off this this video is kind of break down the matchups this deck has and what you need to do with the deck, I guess, to win those matchups. So I guess I'll start with like the mirror match. Specifically, I would say the Poison Eternatus matchup, because the funny thing is people always tell me like surely Poison Eternatus is favored to win that matchup. And the issue I have with Poison Eternatus, like especially in the meta that was then, was I felt that Poison Eternatus had a pretty horrendous ADP matchup. You don't have Power Plant, you don't have a lot of ways to really disrupt them other than Marnie, and the Poison's nice, but you do not have the consistency of basic Pokemon like this deck did to pump to that 270 straight away. And this is the thing I learned on the weekend when I was playing Poison Eternatus, testing out in the new meta. I definitely think that after, like, now that we have Vivid Voltage out, that Poison Eternatus is the better Eternatus deck to run. But at the same time, I think that in this tournament it wasn't good. Because I was rarely hitting the 270 on turn 2 like I was with this list. And that's the big difference in the mirror match, is that with the Spiritombs as well, I forced my opponent, after I Marnied them, to say, alright, you need boss plus like a bunch of poisoning shenanigans here to ever kill my Eternatus. And all I really had to do was Building Spite on my first turn, attach an energy to Eternatus, Building Spite again, attach an energy to Spiritomb, and then swing into their V or VMAX that had energy for 70 damage, and that was the perfect range because they have 340 to go Spiritomb hitting for 70, VMAX hitting for 270, that's a knockout, right? So that was really solid. The fact that I had a 1 energy attacker that could always respond after hitting a VMAX to just knock it straight out was huge. And with the access to Turbo Patch, it means that I have a pretty immediate response sometimes of a second VMAX, which can put a ton of pressure on. So The reason why I feel like you're favored in the mirror is because you have more energy recursion, which is huge. In case for some reason you're playing against Hammer Eternatus or whatever, I just feel like this list was uber consistent compared to a list that runs, you know, a lot of Toxicroaks, a lot of VMAXs, so you are not always guaranteed to actually get a full bench. Without a full bench, you can't do enough damage to actually put the pressure on that you want. And like, sure, running 4 Toxicroak, if you can bench them by turn 2, theoretically gets you a knockout on a VMAX, but that is asking a severe amount of your deck to be able to deliver, and it's just not going to be as consistent as this. So that's the mirror in a nutshell. Also, Sableye V is kind of busted, right? It's really good. Like the main premise though was that Tomb with 2 damage counters was always going to be super good in the mirror match. This Tomb is also really clutch in the Center Scorch matchup. So obviously if you go second, it's great because you can just Power Accelerator, put a bit of pressure on that way. But even if you go first, the game plan is building Spine on Tomb, attach to Eternatus, let them Flare Starter, turn 2, attach, evolve, Dread End, knockout, and then as they go, you just keep building Spiting with Spiritomb, you Dread End into their Center Scorch, even if they have Big Charm and the Heat Fire, once you set up Spiritomb enough, it's the exact same story, right? They can 2-shot this and kill it, but then Spiritomb comes up, and you just attach to it, and you knock out their VMAX after you've swung into it already. And that's insane, right? And that's just for 1 energy. And the big thing is, once you knock out their VMAX, then the fire decks don't really run boss, or they need welder every turn. So you've knocked out 4 prizes already. They've knocked out 3. They're going to get their 4th prize, but then it goes back into your turn. And it's not guaranteed that they can kill the Tomb straight away. Oh, sorry, it's guaranteed they can kill the Tomb, but then you just set up a second Eternatus and you're just rolling. If you hit 1 Turbo Patch in that matchup, it's almost an auto win. It's a very, very favorable matchup. Sableye can also be handy. Just anything that gives off less prizes than the VMAX is super duper handy in that situation. So I feel like Senti was always a pretty favored matchup. They also just didn't really run a lot of hand disruption, so you could easily build a solid hand. Also, Marnie plus Power Plant against Senti was ridiculous. It just meant that if you went like Power Plant, Marnie, Spiritomb, Knockout, and Center Scorch, it was very difficult for them to respond to that. Power Plant also shutting down Heatran's ability was massive when I found it in testing, so that was really, really solid. Pikarom, like I talked about, the math is pretty simple. You just knock out Pikarom plus Choo Choo. The mistake that some people make is they just try and knock out a Bolton that's in the active. If you just knock out the Bolton that's in the active, then what happens is when you knock out the Pikarom, you go down to 1 prize card. And like, I think it happened when I played against Burris and he was able to stamp me. Obviously, yes, you have cards that can out you in those situations, but unless the reason you're killing the Bolton is because the Bolton can kill you next turn, if the Bolton can't kill you next turn, you are better off taking a Full Blitz to the face, killing the Pikarom, and accepting that the Choo Choo is either going to Lightning Ride and kill you, or it is going to just Tandem Shock you. Because your basic math is 2 VMAXs will kill 2 tag teams faster. That's just how it is. So definitely a way to look at it. The Tombs and Goons are like, okay, the Goons are very important. Like I said, 2 Goons is what you need to be able to chip the Choo Choos to knock them out. But yeah, usually they have to Full Blitz to get any kind of ascendancy in the matchup, and you just try and shut that down. Luke Metal, like I mentioned, is a very, very difficult matchup. The plus side is that Turbo Patch does allow you some comeback ability against Luke Metal. You just need to be careful of Malolana. Usually you would only see Malolana at a maximum 3 times in a game, because they usually run 2 copies, plus a Cynthia and Caitlyn. They are manageable though, which is a really important factor. You definitely can beat them, which is something that like people just think, yeah, as an auto loss. Poison Eternatus does have a better matchup for sure, but with the Sableye, you give yourself a chance, and that's really all you need. The Goon Ping is super important, like I said, on the Zacian. Sometimes it's good on the Luke Metal as well. If you can try and get off a Power Accelerator on a Luke Metal before they GX and get that 30 damage in play, it can be really crucial, because after a full Metal Wall, Luke Metal with the goggles on would hit, I think it's 320 HP. So being able to get that chip can mean that you can go Dread End and then like Spiritomb for knockout. You got to obviously be careful of things like Malolana, but you're still able to half hit with the Eternatus, which is pretty solid. Luke Metal though definitely is like the worst matchup that you can play against. Against things like Mewtwo, I would say that you're favored just because Power Plant is a card that exists. It is very, very strong. You're also favored because, like I said, they have no way to one-shot you, and you can just respond with the VMAX every time and just obliterate them. They could run the Horror plus Big Charm. In that situation of like Horror and Big Charm energy, you can always just attack with Spiritomb first, and there's no downside to that. You swing with Spiritomb, you have Turbo Patch if you need it, and also Sable IV is pretty insane against Mewtwo. Spiritomb just chipping it for that damage. Sable IV then coming in and knocking it out means less prizes for your opponent, more ascendancy for you in the matchup. In terms of other meta-relevant decks, ADP, okay, so ADP was rough. Well, it's rough because ADP in its nature is a sack deck. This I would not say is a sack deck. This is uber consistency that does not rely on a busted GX attack. What it relies on is a busted main Pokemon attack that doesn't warp prizes. But the whole plan against ADP is it's a race. When they altered creation, you have to respond with a Dread End, and then the game plan becomes you use Marnie plus Power Plant, Dread End, Knockout. And this is where this was favored compared to Poison Eternatus, because with 8, 11, 12, 15 basic Pokemon, it was much easier with this list to guarantee the full bench knockout. One Goon Ping, Dread End, Knockout, and then it meant to your opponent you had to say, right, I'm going to Marnie you, I'm going to try and play Power Plant at the same time, and you now need to hit like the absolute nuts in back-to-back turns to come back from this. And sometimes they would because ADP can do that, but a lot of times they can't. So that's the crucial play, is if you can Marnie them, you don't even necessarily need the Power Plant, just Marnie them in general, because if they can't Dead Change or Crobat, then they have to force themselves into another supporter, and yeah, you could lose to Pokemon Catcher. It's a possibility, but I think that you had a reasonable ADP matchup because you were able to have Power Plant in play, especially with Christian's list that didn't run a Stadium. Having Power Plant always in play when they run 3 Dead means that those 3 Dead are useless in that matchup if you can get Power Plant down before they can play a Dead. So that was pretty crucial. Any other decks that I haven't mentioned? I'm just trying to think of anything that is meta relevant. Dragapult, because you ran Turbo Patch, even if they got rid of the energy with Clefable, if you had one on the discard, you could always recur it and just go bang. The Turbo Patch was also really clutch for Pikarom, because although Brent and Burris were not running Crushing Hammer, a lot of other Pikarom lists were, so having Patch allowed you to rebound from that really solidly. I'm trying to think, I feel like I'm forgetting like meta decks that exist, but I'm pretty sure I've covered all of the important ones that matter. Blacephalon is the other one. Marnie plus Power Plant is super good because it shuts off Oricorio, it shuts off the Dene, and it also denies them the Giant half. Marnie was just as good as Reset Stamp half the time, and you can also just set up Spiritombs to take knockouts if you need them to in certain situations, especially if Oricorio is benched. You can also just gust certain things, like if they play the Zacian, you just kill the Zacian, kill a potential Dene or Crobat, and then you can just knock out those things. You don't even need to worry about the Blounds. But yeah, Marnie plus Power Plant used to just be really solid to try and prevent them from bringing those games back. But yeah, list felt pretty solid, but what I will say is next format, and when I say next format, I mean like Vivid Voltage, I don't think this is the Eternatus deck that will be the best performing one. My reasons for this is because I don't think Crushing Hammer will see as much play. The card is good, but I think that, you know, the main threat to Eternatus is Colossal. So obviously you could drop the Turbo Patches, you could keep the Power Plants, and maybe shift and make it like 8 Dark and 2 Weakness Guard Energy, which is fair enough. The Tombs, I feel, aren't as good anymore. So the main appeal of the Tomb was it allowed you to get the good VMAX numbers. But against Colossal, Tomb just doesn't cut it. It doesn't do enough damage with the Stone Energies attached to the Colossal, and that's a big problem. And same with the Goon, it just doesn't do enough. Like Sableye maybe, but the problem with like the VMAX list is that, the problem with this list is that there's no real damage spiking cap against Stone Energy. So with, like for example, because Colossal is hitting it, say they have 3 Stone Energy on their VMAX while also having buff padding. That combination is an extra 110 HP that Pokemon has, which takes it to 440. Now, you can swing in with your Dread End, right? You'll be doing 210 damage to a Pokemon that has 380 HP. So it'll have 170 left. And you're thinking, oh, that's pretty good. But then your opponent Malolanas and you need to do 290 damage to kill it. So if you preserve your goons, like, yeah, there's a chance, but then you also need to rely on having the weakness guard, because if you don't, and you're ahead on prizes, they just go, oh, would you look at that? Dojo, Eruption Shot, because I have Guru in play. Oh, you die immediately. So I don't think this list going forward is the best list. Also because, like, Turbo Patch was good against Pikarom. Pikarom's weaker now. I would say that maybe the Power Plant's fine, but I think that going forward, what I would recommend is this. If you're going to run Eternatus, I like the look of this list. This is a list that I used on the weekend. The only difference was that I ran 4 comms and not Lagoon, but I will say that I really wish I had Lagoon, because what Lagoon did, and like the only set that I lost over that, it was another winner box. I came third. I lost the final to an ADP, and the reason I lost it was because it came to that Dread End turn, and I just couldn't set up. I had, let's see, I've got 4, 8, 12, I had 14 basics, but the problem was that I had 6 Pokemon that were not basics. So compared to regular Returners, where I only had 4 that weren't basics, the extra ones really hurt, and then not having that Goon also really hurt, because against ADP, what the Goon would mean is that I could ping them once with the Goon to put them in the 270 range, and it meant I didn't have to switch in the Slowbro to Poison and do all those shenanigans, and it meant that, like, I could ping with Goon, even if I had a big charm, and then use 1 Slowbro plus 1 Croak with the more Poison to guarantee a knockout. So I definitely think 15 basics, when you run an Eternatus list, 15 basics seems to be the magic number. This list, though, like, surprisingly did well. I had 2-0'd Colossal. Granted, they never opened Snorlax to Gormandize, which sucked for them, but I was able to consistently hit the Weakness Guard energies, and with Weakness Guard, that matchup is super winnable. With the Poison, that matchup is super winnable because it's extra damage on board. So not only are you hitting for the 270, but say if you have your 3 Croaks in play, then you're doing an extra 70 on top of that. So you're hitting for 340 every turn. So even with the Stone Energies in play, you're doing enough to where they can't Mallow Lana and physically recover from that situation, which is massive. I also found the Hiding Darks were super clutch in matchups like Pikarom and Mewtwo, because it meant that you could switch, and then with things like Dark City as well, you just had so many ways to retreat that you could easily play out of anything. You could retreat one VMAX into another one, start swinging, a lot of advantages. This felt like a really good list, and the only thing I wish I had for that weekend was the Goon. So if I felt like Eternatus was still good in the format, I would definitely just run this list. Right now, I'm definitely on the fence about it. I think that it is a strong deck in the meta. Also, the downside, I guess, of this list is that it has a pretty weak Luke Metal matchup, which is odd to say. I think maybe if you ran the Sableye V, which you could run over the Goon, theoretically, then it could be good, or you could drop 1 Great Ball for a Sableye, and that would be totally acceptable as well. There's no downside to that at all. That might be good, but I think Sableye V is only really good with Turbo Patch. I think that being able to set that thing up like in a flash and just get an immediate knockout is the main appeal. If you bench it and just attach an energy to it, it is really easy for your opponent to assess that as a threat, gust it, and kill it. So it was the surprise factor of the Sableye on a turn with Turbo Patch that was the main appeal. But I would say going forward, this is probably the Eternatus list that I would run. It feels like it has the most matchup favors. It feels like it has a matchup against everything, but I would recommend, I reckon, actually dropping 1 Great Ball down and then running the Sableye, because against Luke Metal, the thing is that you can bench the Sableye, and with the Poison you can knock out the Zacian, and with Zacian dead, there's nothing else that can kill the Sableye. So you can kind of slow attach to it, and knowing that you can Poison a Pokemon and then chip it, and if they don't have the Malolana, then Sableye can just come in and kill the Zam, is pretty solid. So I will say that this is probably as good as the list would get. You could drop the Dark City to put back the Great Ball, but I liked 3 Dark City because I feel like it was enough to guarantee Slowbro got worth out of playing it, for sure. But yeah, going forward, I think this list is better. It is not as consistent as the list that I use for Players Cup, but it has better matchup favor for the Vivid Voltage format, without a shadow of a doubt. And Weakness Guard is necessary over Capture Energy. While you can't search for as many Pokemon, you don't want to die to things. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I don't think there's anything else I really wanted to discuss. I just wanted to show my Players Cup list, how I feel, it went. Obviously, I still can't believe that I got as far as I did with the list. this Eternatus list is one of 2 decks that I'm currently considering for the finals of the Players Cup, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time. There is one other deck that I'm heavily considering, and I will be playing it next week at Locals to see how it goes. I don't want to reveal it until, obviously, Players Cup comes around. I don't mind revealing this list because, I mean, it would not be a surprise if I played Eternatus at the Players Cup, given what it did for me in the qualifiers. And I think that this variant is the best one for the Vivid Voltage meta. But I will leave that for you guys to decide. If you enjoyed this analysis and kind of deep dive into my building process and, you know, the cards and their effectiveness and explaining like why there are certain numbers of things in decks, then, you know, let me know in the comments. If you enjoy these kind of things, there's a lot of other decks that I can cover, decks that I've built or used, and why I think they're meta relevant. There's a lot of decks that I have built on here, like for example, no, I want to save that change because the Sableye is good. Like I've got a lot of decks, as you can see here, that are pretty cool. Not all of them are like super meta relevant, but there's a couple that I think are pretty solid. I definitely want to look into Rillaboom now that we have Zarude. I think that there is a chance that that deck could actually be insane. I don't like that there's still things like Blounds and Scorch in the meta, but if Colossal sees a lot of popularity, it's good. But also because Luke Metal exists, I think that Rillaboom's bad, but you never know. Zarude is kind of crazy for it, so we'll see. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you like the video. If you haven't subscribed already, I would appreciate it, but at the same time, yeah, I'm not here for the subs, I'm not here for the likes. I just say it because everyone says it. What I just really want is for you guys to enjoy and maybe to take anything from my ramblings of what I say. I have no idea if any of it is helpful or insightful. But yeah, I am just so proud of this list and the work that it put in over the Players Cup. You could definitely run this list in the current... Oh my god, okay. Pop-ups, get out of there. You could definitely run this list in the current meta, and I think it'd be okay. The only changes I would recommend maybe is dropping the turbo patches. Probably the easiest swaps that I can think of is that you drop all the turbo patches and turn 2 of these energies into weakness guard for sure. So 8 regular and 2 weakness guard in there. You drop all the patches because I just don't think they're... you could keep the patches actually. Just change those to weakness guards, and then you could probably keep the rest of the list the same. I would maybe look at a different attacker over Tomb. Something like Hooper could actually be a lot better now because Hooper does hit the VMAX Colossal for a bit harder, and like even the minimal damage that Hooper can get can still set up a potential Sableye knockout, which is kind of huge. And Sableye not being weak to Dark is kind of nice as well. It means that if they don't have the dojo in play and they're behind on prizes, they can't actually kill you, which is kind of cool. Also, the Yveltal that discards special energy could be nice in this list. Power Plant still feels like the best stadium. And yeah, like this, you could definitely still use this deck, and it would probably see success because it's good against a lot of other things in the meta. But I think you would want to cater for Luke Metal and Colossal a bit better, which is why I think the Poison list is better. But yeah, I'm going to stop talking now. That's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this, then I may post another video coming up diving into some other decks, either ones that were good in the Players Cup and I'll explain why, or just decks in general that I've been enjoying using, whether it be at locals or just online. But yeah, on the Verd, Matty.